Perfect. There we go.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, thank you, and welcome to this kind of a bittersweet day because this is the last presentation in our fall 2021 Sustainability Research and Practice Seminar. My name is Bradley Flam. I'm the Director of the Office of Sustainability, and we've been very proud to co-sponsor this series with the Office for Research and Sponsored Programs and the Sustainability Council's Scholarly and Creative Activities Committee, the chair of whom is sitting here in our live audience. We're excited today to welcome Professor Anita Foeman. I just want to say one of the first times I met Professor Foeman was at a series of talks on race and civil rights called Lunch Encounters. And I am just thrilled that we are able to invite her to our series of lectures today. So without further ado, let me hand the virtual floor to you, Dr. Foeman.
Okay, good. Now let me see if I can share my screen here. Let me introduce what I'm doing, first of all. My work, for folks who know me and folks who don't, is on identity and DNA. And for this particular session, I thought it would be interesting to talk about what the science of race means in terms of really looking at what it says and what it doesn't say, and in terms of having people think about science as something that's important and relevant in conversations. And one of the nice things about the work that I do with DNA is that it links so many different fields. So what I want to share with you is the research project that I've been doing for the last now almost 20 years on DNA. I'll talk about how it started, and then what I think it says about sustaining society and sustaining health, welfare, et cetera, in more efficient ways. And I think it's relevant to this conversation. So let me get into this, and I'm going to give you some background on the work as I move into this. Can everybody see? It takes a second to come up. If you're seeing a black screen, that's what I see also. There we go. So the work that I've been doing started out by two areas of interest that I had that were not necessarily related. My background is organizational communication. I actually did not have any interest in talking about race in particular, but what happened was that I find myself in situations because I knew a variety of people from a variety of backgrounds, and people were always asking me to explain, you know, white people to black people and black people to white people, and I was friends with all kinds of folks. So that was happening to me in 1982. And then right along with that, I had been following the Human Genome Project. And the Human Genome Project was a project that was mapping the human genome. And I was just interested in it because I was interested in the recipe for a human. It seemed like it was really, to a large extent, the ball of wax. And I had friends who were sending me stuff all the time because they knew how interested I was. And at one point in a Discover magazine article, very early on, somebody said, we can look at your genetics and tell what your background is, what your ancestry is. And in this sort of serendipitous way, two interests came together. I thought, I bet there are people walking around who identify in certain ways, but their genetics are really different than what they think. And so I started to look at two areas of literature. One was literature on narrative and one was literature on DNA. And, and when I initially started this work, I called it science and magic, with the belief that the science was this objective thing that, you know, everybody saw the same, and that magic was the narrative that we then applied to this objective world. I have since learned that science is truly a human endeavor, And that it's really relevant for all of us to understand that, because because I'm interested in diversity and the fact that few women and people of color were going to sciences, that people were saying science is objective, 1 and 1 is 2 regardless of your race. But there are narratives in science, and those narratives were not being made relevant to people, to women and to people of color. And when I started doing this work, I could not imagine work that was more relevant to me than looking at ancestry, et cetera. So that is sort of a link that they've got made. But the idea of narrative is that we're going to tell people like stories. You, in your family, there is a story that you have about where you're from, about what your background is, about what your ethnicity is, about how your people came to this land. So people tell narratives, and Walter Fisher says there's a kind of narrative proof that you have to tell something in a believable way and people have to accept the story. Now, in terms of race, if I tell you I'm African American and I'm from Philadelphia, you're not going to have any problem with that story. But there may be other things that are true, and you're going to see some slides in a minute that support that. If I tell you that I'm part Japanese, it may be true, but you may not believe it. And so what we have found in this DNA project is that it expands our understanding of what people are and our understanding of race, and it hooks it in to a genetic story that's very relevant to everybody. So that's the narrative.
Professor Foeman?
Yes.
I'm so sorry. We are on Zoom. We're only seeing about a portion of the slide. I'm wondering if you could stop your screen share for a moment and then try to restart it. It seems like there's just a glitch and we're not seeing the full slide here.
Let's see.
I'm sorry to have to interrupt you. There we go. Okay, perfect.
You can see this okay?
We can see it now. Yes, thank
I'll
you.
just put it this way. It's not in the, okay. So at any rate, I'm not sure if some of the movement will show, but we'll just keep it this way. The first thing that I did when I started doing this work, because I'm in the Department of Communication, is that I went to our geneticists on campus, and we now have Teresa Donze Reiner is now our geneticist who I work with, but this was somebody even before that. And she said, you have to read The 7 Daughters of Eve, which talks about how they first made this theory. And the theory, and see, this would have movement, but you can't see it. The theory was that you can look at somebody's genetics and tell where, by looking at mutations, where they come from. And because as people moved out of Africa, which this video would show, out of Africa around the globe, different mutations occurred. And in a minute, I'm going to talk about some of those mutations. For example, if you have blue eyes, there is, anybody here blue eyes? That is a mutation that occurred only 6,000 to 10,000 years ago, which is amazing. And they think that one person was the person who gave everybody who has blue eyes. And so, if you have blue eyes, we know that particular group came at a particular, came together at a particular time and goes back to a particular place. And so to test this theory, Brian Sykes, who is the author of the book 7 Daughters of Eve, wanted to get the oldest DNA that he could to see if he could trace that back. So many of you know the 5,000-year-old Iceman who was found in the Alps between Italy and Austria. And so what he did is he got permission to take a little piece and to try to find somebody living today who had the same DNA profile. And so indeed, he took this DNA from the Alps between Italy and Austria, found somebody living in London who had the same DNA profile. And there are different kinds of DNA profiles, and this was one of many that are used. But he found a woman whose name was Marie Mosley, and she had the same exact DNA. And he said, so this meant that she was a direct descendant. And the interesting thing is, it said that one of the strangest things, that I can't see the whole, oh, sorry, I don't know how to get that out of the way for you here. There you go. Aren't you smart? Let's see. Okay. Yeah, okay, I'll drag her all the way. Well, now I can't see. Okay. All right. I'm going to drag this and make it a little bit smaller. Sorry for interrupting.
Drag the photos or the images?
Yeah, is that good? So one of the strangest and at first surprising things about this story is that Marie began to feel something for the Iceman, and that she had seen him in pictures being shunted around from glacier to post-mortem room, poked and prodded, opened up, bits cut off. And I won't read every word, but the idea is that suddenly she does not think of this Iceman as a thing, but now her direct relative, which is exactly what he was. And of course, if you have followed the out of Africa theory, which is sustained by all of this research, we all came from sub-Saharan Africa. And today when I talk to students, they pretty much go like, yeah, but this was not always the case. There were other theories about how people evolved and hierarchy of that. And so this was a huge breakthrough at the time that said we all came out of sub-Saharan Africa, we moved across the globe, and there aren't any separate races. If there is a continuous line around the globe, and it continues to change and fold back upon itself. And people like Brian Sykes was throughout England. And this is Rick Kittles, who actually came here to speak and talked about his research. He, at the time, had the largest database of African DNA. And now I'm sure Ancestry DNA has like dwarfed everybody with their database. But he still has a company called African DNA, which we've used a little bit, but it wasn't helpful for what we were trying to do in our research. But what happens is that they go to places in the world and find groups of people who have been there for generation after generation after generation, and then they're comparing the mutations in your DNA to those, and so it is, it's a strategic comparison. And for a while, the largest database was European. So if you were of European background, you could get pretty good data. If you were Asian, they would have like all of Asia. And one woman we tested said, yeah, I'm Asian, thank you. Or, if you were from Africa, they'd circle the whole continent of Africa. They have gotten so much better. But the interesting thing is that we continue to change and evolve in terms of ancestry, because now, because of modern technology, people travel around the globe all the time. And people marry and mate who would not have met or very rarely in generations past. So the DNA has become more and more complex mixture. And as a matter of fact, one of the neat things about this is that when I have a question, I will call up the authors of these articles, who some of the work that they've written is really dense and hard to read. And, they'll talk to me about, geologists and mathematicians and whatever, and they talk about the admixture of the United States. So even though we think of the United States as being this, diversity of people, they talk about admixes that look like Americans, like an African American does not look like an African, and a European American, their profile, it does not look like somebody from Ireland, even though the Irish kids go, they say, oh, I'm 100% Irish. Then you test their DNA and they fess up that, no, really my aunt, my father's side of the family is Italian, and that's uniquely American as a particular profile, and it continues to change. And so in our research, we've had the same protocol since the thing began in really 2005. And I want to talk about some of the results and just some of the discussion that we've had. And that's our past president who participated. I've also tested Chris Ferrantino, who was fun to test. And it's been, this is my one braggy slide, that has been covered a lot, which the shocking thing about it is that when I started doing this work, nobody knew what I was talking about. I was like, I want to do some research on this, because I read this article and there happened to be a grant for $1,500 from the Multicultural Faculty Commission. And I got a $1,500 grant to buy 3 kits, because every kit was $450. Now you can get them on sale for $50, like from the best companies. And I had to find a lab who could do it. The results were quite clunky and limited. They tested hundreds of alleles. Now they test millions of alleles. And the implications, and this is the implications for health and efficiency of delivery of health is just starting to begin. And I did a course for a great course, now it's Windrium, but for great courses. And one of the people I interviewed said, like, it's probably going to be likely that in the future, you'll get a DNA sample from everybody to get a profile, and that will follow you through your health history throughout your entire life. And while, I talked to him about race, and he said, we use the term race as, this sort of clunky idea, but race does not tell you nearly as much as looking like at 1 million alleles that you have that are much more informative, because you and I can have a similar allele and be identified as different races, and 2 people could seem like they're very similar and have different profiles, especially where it matters to, health or whatever. There are patterns, but it doesn't mean, the best thing to do is look at somebody's DNA. And so our process is that I run around and get everybody I can to take a spit test. And then they do a pre-survey to tell me what they think they're going to find. And then it takes about 6 weeks to get the test back. And then we get the information. And then we have a discussion about the difference between what they think they're going to find and what indeed they found. It is important to say from the start, we are 99.9% exactly the same, regardless of race, creed, or color. And so we're talking about a very small percent that we're often wrong about, and we obsess about it. So it's really important to say that this is not the ball of wax. This is a very small, of course, it has implications for health, et cetera, but we are mostly just the same. People talk about race as a construction. Science is also constructed. Democracy is constructed. So the whole idea is to get different ways of looking at human beings other than, in my case, for race. So I wanted to take a look at 3, because people often say, like, what are they using when they look at, they try to determine your background. And each company has very sophisticated proprietary tests that they use, but this is what they do. And at first, I didn't know what I was looking at the first time that I got the results. They're telling you a gene and then a place on a gene and then how it varies by what your background is. So these are 3 ancestry informative markers. The first one is HERC2 and is really one of the important identifiers for European. As I mentioned, it's only about 6,000 to 10,000 years old, which is amazing when you talk about everybody before that had brown eyes, everybody before that. And again, they think that it came from one person, but an 8 to 10% of the population has blue eyes. But as you can see, there are populations in Africa and other places that have blue eyes. So other people for other reasons can have that mutation. So when they say it's ancestry informative, it doesn't mean it's a lock, that everybody who has this, but it's informative. And that's why there are always error rates. And you could just have the mutation randomly, things happen. Like most people, we talk about cancer informative mutations like the BRCA1, but most people who get cancer don't have that. They get it for other reasons, environment. And now the whole thing of epigenetics is big now. So your genes don't tell everything, you have other things. This is an interesting, EDAR is one of the most ancestry informative for Asians. And I thought this was really interesting that it's related to the straight, thick hair that we associate with that. And also a pattern of teeth, which make people who are Asians look more androgynous. And there are several articles that said, why are Asians cute? And that was the gene that they said that made their face and teeth, and also small breasts. So I don't know how that fit in. And again, for these genetic markers, often people don't know why they were perpetuated. For example, the blue eyes, Is it because it lets more light in if you're in cold climates, or did people go like, oh, I like those blue eyes? That's different. So there's lots of speculation. And again, because people are constructing, I mean, the scientific method is probably one of the most, important social change, social constructions, but it is one way of knowing. And who knows, there might, if society or humanity had gone in different ways, maybe something similar to the scientific method, but not the same, would have been developed. So certainly scientific method it has been used to try to figure out what these genes are, but they're still theorizing. And one of the most ancestry informative markers for people of African ancestry, and it is one of the most ancestry informative markers at all. It's the Duffy antigen, and it comes from it's similar to the one that gives you sickle cell anemia, and it's a response to malaria. And so similar, with malaria, that would kill you before sickle cell anemia would. So people get this particular, and this, there is health information associated with Duffy, but I didn't drill down into that. But the Duffy antigen is one of the most ancestry informative. So I ran my own DNA to look at these, and I have one allele for brown eyes and one for blue, and I have brown eyes because that's dominant. I have one Duffy that is more associated with European, one Duffy that's more associated with the African ancestry, and none of the Asian stuff. And that is actually very informative of an African American, because the average African American has about 20% European ancestry, and it comes from slavery. I mean, that's what most of it is. I don't know what the average European has of other backgrounds. However, in our research that we did, the most overestimated was European ancestry, because people who are white thought they didn't have anything else. And they would go like, oh, I have 4%, African ancestry. And so back to the narratives, in narrative, if people were light, they would tend to have the narrative that I'm white. And so, other things would be missed until you take a DNA test. And one of the reasons that it's really cool to give the DNA test is it starts to tell a different narrative of America. There is a reason African Americans have 20% European ancestry. There's a reason that white Americans will have 2 or 3 shocking, percentages of African ancestry. And the most after European, the most overestimated was Native Americans, both by white and Black people, which we think, we've had, again, what's the narrative to the explanation for it? We think that people often replace Black ancestry with Native American, white ancestry with Native American, because it was really fraught to, the whole slavery thing. And it was much more romantic to say that you had Native American, even though like we wiped out 90% of the Native American population. Everything is like, I'm Indian. So we found that. And Native Americans have been very careful about getting their DNA tested. There have been, because of identifying people as Native American has political implications. So I wanted to show you some of the people that we tested and some of the insights that it gave us. This woman's from Colombia. She says since forever, she identifies as white. And when we tested her DNA, that's what it looked like. And that was really not uncommon for somebody who was Latinx. And the interesting thing was when you'd say, look at all of that, they would go like, yeah, they wouldn't be surprised, but that was not the narrative. The narrative that was helpful for them was to say, yeah, I'm white. I just finished talking to a guy who was like, I'm shocked that I had all this other. And again, interesting, now she's from Colombia. It doesn't surprise me at all. She has Native American, because here are white people and Black people overestimating like crazy. And Asians who had Native American, which I'll explain in a second, and Latinx people who had Native Americans were underestimating it. And she said, there's a lot of prejudice against indigenous people in Colombia and these places. And so people didn't want to have that in their background. So they saw that as, as negative. So again, once you can get rid of that narrative, that's what you do. Some other interesting folks. Here's somebody whose family, who's actually related to the geneticist that I first used. And she said, test my husband. He's got Cherokee in his background. And there's a big narrative in their family. Well, this happened multiple times, that it was actually African. And he went back to, God bless him, he went back to his family and said, you know, it's like, they said, well, maybe she was part Black. And this happened several times in our research. And I don't know if you, Johnny Cash's first wife was said to have been like Italian. Italians could have been dark. She was also part Black, and that, you know, that was the narrative, that she was Italian, and people tried to out her, and she was like, no, no, no. So this happened to us in several cases. The thing that was surprising, by the way, is not when, because I was looking for the racial stuff, I can't tell you how many people we found who did not have a parent that they expected. And so now the research that we are now doing is on, what's it called, there's a term for it, in effect, an unexpected parental event. And that happened in our research more than a couple of times. So this is a woman, this is interesting. Latinx is not a race. It's an ethnicity, as I've discovered, is African American. It's not like saying I'm Italian or, you know, European, or and so it is. Some of the labs, this was an early lab that we used, would tell somebody that they were Latinx, and that doesn't really mean anything. This woman identifies as Black, but when she tested, it came up as all Latinx. So we sent back, we said, she doesn't identify in this way at all. So retest it without that. So this is what it came back, and that's how she identifies. Well, we found out years later that the lab was a forensics lab, and they were looking to help police catch people. So they're like, you're looking for somebody who looks Latinx. They didn't care how she identifies it, which again, how do you construct somebody's identity? Her identity based on her background and culture and people she knew, she identifies as Black, even though she was fully aware of these other things. Police are like, you're looking for somebody who looks like they're Latina. And she has said many times that people come up to her on the street, start speaking Spanish to her. There's another guy, his dad is Chinese, his mom is African American. He came up as all African American. He's like, I know my dad is, you know, who he is. And again, they're like, they're not saying, oh, he's a biracial person whose father is Chinese. They're like, you're looking for a Black guy on the street. So, and you can imagine the, you know, the complexity of that. So anyway, this, as I said, was a slide that had some movement, but it's a little quiz. How many of these people have African ancestry? And the answer is that they all do. This one, how many of these people have Asian ancestry? And they all do. And it's cute. The woman in the middle went on a trip to China. She said people kept saying to her, you look Chinese. So that was funny. She just had a small amount, but she did. And the shocking thing was how many African Americans had Asian background. And I had a small amount in one of mine, which was interesting because when I interviewed my grandfather, he was born in 1900, I asked him the first thing, and he grew up with a stepfather. I asked him what the first thing he remembered was, and he said, like Chinese people in his neighborhood who wore the long braids, and people have said to him, well, they didn't say it in a pleasant way. They said you look like and it was a derogatory word for Chinese people. And I do wonder if that was part of his background. He wouldn't have known, and he's just a Black man in the South. So, you know, light-skinned Black man in the South. All these people do have Native American, and all of these people had European. Most far and away, most people we tested had European, which tells you something about the influence of like European people around the world. Just about everybody we tested had at least some European in their background. It's like they got around. Then the question of this one was, who's African? Whose background, whose profile was this? And anybody want to guess who you think it? A? Anybody think it's B? C? It is actually B. She identifies, which is interesting. A newer test, this is an older test. A newer test would surely identify her as Indian because they have focused in. But this one, the older test would give you more of like somebody's more distant past. And now they, for example, in my first test, it had that I had Scandinavian and British and African and some other things, but Scandinavian, British, and African. And I always interpreted that like the Scandinavians, the Vikings beat up the British, and then they beat up the slaves, and that's and then when they did it again, it was just British and African. And you could see like the story starts to get tighter. And I think that's what happened with her, because surely that, she's like European, looks European as an Indian person, and there's that in her background, but I'm sure it would be different now. This was so touching. This one, which one of these people has no East Asian ancestry? And he's the one who has no East Asian. The gentleman in the middle is a Holocaust survivor. He's since died. When he got his results back, and he's Eastern European, you go far enough in Russia and you're in Asia. So it's, and then again, these are, and he got the test back and he said, oh my goodness, maybe this is the end of race. And I was like, you know what, if somebody had survived the Holocaust and still can say that statement, then maybe there's hope for us all, because he's seen the worst of humanity. But it's, and again, that shows you that these lines are not hard and fast. I will pop through just a couple more because I want to give you a chance if you have questions. This young woman is so funny. She identifies as 100% Italian. And it was actually, again, it would probably be tighter in one of the new tests, but she calls her mother and tells her, she goes, this is great. And her mother says, that's not right, and you're not ours. And she said her dermatologist said to her, he wasn't surprised because her skin's dark, and there's a condition called keloids that people with dark skin tend to get. And she was always getting treated for keloids. Again, today, it would probably be much more, and the Hispanic, it would be much tighter, but still.
What would that Hispanic be?
It's some
25%.
Yeah, and it was that lab was in Texas, and so they had a lot of Hispanic people, and it's some combination of indigenous. It's some amalgam that they put together. We've switched. Ancestry only does geographic regions, and they don't do any of that stuff. But yeah, we were getting that for many people, and we would call back and fuss about it. Oh, I know what it is, but I can't tell you how many people who are Italian, even with the best tests that we're getting now, would get, from Middle East to Northern Africa, because Italy was, the crossroads of the world, and people were, fighting there all the time. And one thing we've discovered, if people are around each other, somebody's going to procreate. So it was definitely, that's one of the most diverse areas we all also find us. And also it's a potent culture. So we find students now, they'll say I'm Italian, but then when you drill down, really, they say my mom's Irish, but we just like the Italian. It's like they eat the food, and it's so much of it's psychological. I've had that with Irishes as well. This one is so cute. I just have to share this one. This guy is half Korean and half European, and it was like right on the money. His dad is Irish from Ireland. His mom is Korean from Korea. And I said, other people just wanted to jump in the gene pool there, just a little sliver. He said he will go to places and see older Korean women look at him like, I think I recognize you, but like, I'm not quite sure. And he said, Dr. Foeman, my Korean is tight. I speak great Korean. And he said, as soon as he opens his mouth, they go, I want you to meet my granddaughter. Because for them, speaking the language, like what is it that makes somebody authentically anything? I've tested people who said that they're Black, they'll have 10 or 12% African ancestry. Are they Black? Certainly by the one drop, but what makes somebody, and I've had people with much more African ancestry not identify with the culture at all. And so it really breaks open this idea of what makes us who we are. And again, because it's going to be so tied to how we are treated for, for health and welfare and everything from mental health to physical well-being, that this may start to become an important part of our identity. as much as standard categories of race. It's already changing some of that. So I'm gonna, oh, just because this is a good story. I don't know, you know, the Swope buildings, and some people will recognize this. This is the son of, the grandson of the Swope, who was the president here. And so he was really interested in this project, and it was a big WASPy family. So we test him, and he comes up as 69% Jewish. So we're saying, like, maybe it was like they were passing, maybe they were Jewish. So it turns out, no, they had a family of friends who were Jewish, who apparently the mother was more friendly with than. So, oh, it's been crazy. I have asked him multiple times if it's okay. You know, he shared this story with like a reporter. So I'm not speaking out of school. I'm like, are you okay? So he was, and he was very close to his dad, but now he's got another brother. Like, it's really funny. The guy lived like 2 blocks from him. So that was a funny story. So let me just pop to the end here. So it is my 35-minute version of this. There was a book written by a group out of Harvard that was called Creating a New Racial Order, that says we are going to think about race in a more complicated way because of immigration. And there are people now who do not fit into the ways that we talk about race. They're coming from new places of the world. They're trying, my research partner, Bessie Lawton, who's from the Philippines of Chinese ancestry, said, like, it was so hard for her to figure out how we talk about race and where she fits in, that, you know, these new people are starting to change it. People from Africa who do not identify as African Americans in the same way. So immigration, multiculturalism, all this discussion of race and identity and genomics is going to be changing the way that we talk about race. There's been discussion of whether we should take race out of the census. So that's up for discussion. And just to end on a provocative note, I don't know how many of you that follow CRISPR or Talon, some of those gene editing. There's already discussion. It was one company that's saying, pick your baby's sex, skin color, and hair color and eye color. And they're talking about doing genetic editing. And you've, I'm sure, heard of the baby who was born with a the twins that were born supposedly with a resistance to HIV, which I'm not sure how you would know whether that had worked or not, but I don't want to even ask how he's testing that. So the whole idea of race and identity, and if we can change that, and what's the nature of that, if you change somebody's skin and hair color and eye color, have you changed their race? You know, what are you changing? So we continue to find this work just really fascinating. And after, as I said, almost 20 years, I feel like I've just barely scratched the surface in what all this means. So that's my shtick. And if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer. We'll try to answer them. Thank you. And anybody online too. Oh, sure.
Well, it's a comment. This is quite fascinating. Actually, now I want to go.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, I guess, I mean, you really touched on this already, but, you know, I guess it has to be a prediction. And, I'm curious to know, because the way we think about race, where do you see it, you know, in the people that you work with? I'm just so curious to see their reactions when you get the results, and then it's like,
It wasn't what you
look at their reactions, and you do a whole study on reaction to.
That's what we do. That's exactly, yeah.
So it's just so, because, you know, we assign merit to race, unfortunately.
No, are you kidding? I'm right there with you.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I hope that, you know, it does kind of flip the script in a way and make people think about it on that, really, more than anything.
You know what? The first thing that shocked me was that people would go, I don't care what the test says, I'm still 100% Italian. You know, like I don't know why that shocked me in such a way. People were like, screw the test. I was just, and I have found that it is subtle change. So our first article was called Questioning Race, and the second one was called Shifting Winds, because what we did find is even though people would say, the hell with that test, I'm still gonna call myself, they would say, hey, I took a DNA test and it said I'm da 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 da. And so that in and of itself changes your story. Even though people are saying, I'm not changing my story, then I say that, and I have changed my story, and people would post these things on Facebook. And so we found that it was changing very slowly. We also found that the least likely to change their identity were white people. And we were like, what do I have to gain by becoming multiracial? It's like, I'm already at the top, so I'll just keep that. So we found that, though, in the census, I've just seen some analysis of census, that more people who are white are starting to say that, but it's not, these are going to be subtle changes over time and probably hit like a tipping point on some of it. So there's that. The other thing we found is when people just got hit in the face, and that's where when somebody found out, there's this one woman, Taylor, and again, I have permission, people were saying to her all her life, you look Asian. And she was like, nah, it's Southern Italian. Again, Italian covers everything. And so she takes the test and it comes up half Asian. And she goes, her parents had totally denied any of this. She says to her dad, look at this. He says, well, if that's your test, then Joe Schmo, like somebody she'd never heard of, is your father. And when something is just undeniable, that's when people have like a real psychological issue with it. So that's what we're studying now. And then, it means their parents have lied. One of the first people we tested with a very crude test looks at it and says, I don't think that's my father's ethnic profile. And these were, like I said, these were the early clunky tests. I'm like, their error rates and whatever. And I swear it was in her brain someplace. She swears she had no idea. So these people go back and she confronts her dad, and at first, and this is the pattern, at first he goes, no, what are you talking about? And then when it came out, everybody in the family knew but her. Everybody, it was just everybody knew. And so people are traumatized. I don't know if it's the right word, but they're certainly shaken by it. And there is not a protocol for what to do with people who find this stuff. I've never had I've had people at the beginning go like, and even so, I wish I didn't know this. The fact is, these secrets are not gonna, once this DNA stuff came out, you don't have to test yourself. Somebody else can, your distant relatives. So there's gonna be more of this. Many people I've talked to said like old secrets people used to keep are not gonna be kept anymore. And it doesn't have to be it could be like 2 or 3 generations back that's, you lost that link of the family. So at any rate, it's changing society slowly and quickly, depending upon how in your face those results are. But thanks, it was a long answer to a short question.
No.
Yes.
Have you done any comparison of the American construction and conception of race to that in Brazil or Nigeria?
No, but I would, that's when I said we just scratch the surface. No, because I'm sure there's a different admix in like Brazil, because Americans tended to split out. In Brazil, there's a lot of like racism and colorism and all that, but people mixed more. So there's, in the same family, they can have somebody called Black, somebody called, and we took a group of students to the Cayman Islands, and they did not understand how Americans talked about race. It was just really interesting. We said something about going to a Black church. They had no idea what why would you paint a church black? And because they said they all worship, again, there's colorism and all that, but it's so much different. And and also a guy said to me, he just retired. He was studying in Germany, and he said they're illegal in Germany. The tests are because of their history of race. So I'd be interested in what's happening with them now, but they were. So around the world, the whole thing of race is, I would love my next life. Anybody else? Oh, we're just out of time. Any last question? And thanks for everybody there.
Amy might have some questions from,
yes,
chat,
please.
but there might be- Perhaps Amy could read out any questions there are.
Okay, yeah, please, Amy, what's up?
I don't see any questions in the chat right now, but we've still got quite a few people here. Anyone want to unmute themselves or type a question into the chat?
Oh, and hi, Cheryl Wanko. And yeah, they're just 2 minutes, so I'll answer in a short answer.
If you're able to go over. it,
Yeah, I did, but I know people have other stuff, but I'm happy if somebody has a question to answer it. Oh, I see something in the chat. Let me click on that. All right. Thank you, thank you. So not only race, et cetera, constructed as a whole, but it's constructed by individual. Yeah, thank you. That's a great question, Cheryl. Yes, the labs construct race as well, because a lab will say, like, what's Middle Eastern? Like, where does it end? Where does it begin? What alleles we're gonna look at? What combination are we gonna look at? So yes, absolutely. And that's why the good labs are gonna probably give you pretty similar, though I've had people have, some differences or lose something or gain something. Yes, but not only does every lab, but labs update. It's the same DNA, and then they'll update. And as I said, I lost my Scandinavian, and so it's like,
And I mean, and also, I mean, it's regional too. I would imagine. Yeah. I mean, like Texas might be interpreting all of this different than Massachusetts, right?
Well, the labs or the ancestry is out in Utah, and but that I hadn't even thought of it. Like, yes, because this Texas lab we have was the one that was doing the Latino, which nobody, and also the European Jewish. I had one kid get very upset. His name was like, Aaron Weisenstein, and and he came up half Jewish, and he was like, what is this? What is this? And honestly, you stereotype how people look. Somebody might look at him and guess that he's Jewish. And finally he said, Jewish is a religion. My father's Jewish. I'm not Jewish. And I was like, wow, that's really interesting. And he said, it really makes me angry when people say that I'm Jewish. Well, Jewish is a religion, but if any people are isolated together in space, you can identify them like those groups of, remember the cult that had they wore the poofy hairdos and the old fashioned dresses when they had multiple wives. Well, they were having trouble telling who was the father of the kids because they were all so similar genetically. So you could identify that group. Race is just one way, and ancestry is just one way to identify people. Anybody who's separated together over a period. That's what I'm saying. There's a particular admix profile in Texas, well, they're doing that now. They're tracing. They used to just say where you're from. Now they can identify when your ancestors left Ireland, where they went. Did they go to the north? Did they go to the south? Did they go? It's unbelievable because of the power of these programs that they can use. And as I said, there's so much more. So they keep updating it all the time. Same genes, but they keep updating me. So. Anybody else? Let's see. Oh, I can only see a quarter of the screen. That was early on. Okay, I think that's. Oh, what was the R word, Cheryl? Oh, I'm so used to the R word, like people saying retarded, like, yes, yes. Yeah, June 1st, Cheryl. Yeah.
Question.
Yeah.
I'm curious if it's been part of your research to track how participants' understanding of the concept of race and how much of it is socially determined rather than genetically determined. Do those conversations change over time?
That's another, I would love to track these people down and have conversations. And we haven't. The most interesting thing I've seen is that when we first did the test, when people were not familiar with them, the stuff that people would say was, and I don't know if they were caught off guard or whatever, like somebody said, they had a little Asian in their background. They're like, oh, that's why my son's good in math.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think that's why your son is good in math. You've got 2% Asian in your background. Or one kid was adopted and had a little African in his background, just like a bunch of other white kids did. And he was like, oh, I heard my biological dad liked basketball. So it's just interesting. People, and one person was so funny. She said, and I got her on tape. If I try, she would never let me use it. But she said, I don't think I'd have any African or Middle Eastern. I just don't think my ancestors would do that. And she said, I don't know what I would do if I was like break into a Negro spiritual, But people would say stuff like that. I rarely have anybody make that kind of statement offhand. And I think it's because they're not as surprised that there's other stuff in there because these tests have like proliferated. Or at least they know that, they're not, that they are expecting something might be there, so they're not caught off guard to make that kind of a statement, because I don't hear that much anymore. But of course, I don't sit down. I used to interview everybody individually, but now, we've done thousands of people, so we just use the paper pretest unless there's something particularly interesting to poke at.
How about the differences among siblings?
I haven't done enough of that, but it's funny. People will think we had two siblings. They were half half Chinese and half Black. One identified as Black and one identified as Korean. I'm sorry. One identified as Korean. Friends were Korean, she spoke Korean. The other one's Black. Her boyfriend was African. And they thought because they felt so different, they were like, oh, and we look different. We tested them. They were so similar. But siblings, I want to test these twins. They're probably 18 now because they were in grandparents' university when I first met them. Twins. She's tall and blonde. He's short and dark. It's like they have to convince people they're siblings. And I would love to see what their DNA looks like, because you get half from one parent, half from the other, but it's not the same half. So,
Right. It mixes.
yeah.
What was that, National Geographic?
We were in that National Geographic, yeah. So, yeah, with the one with the Black. To me, they didn't look that different, but Thanks for coming.
Yeah. I don't want to make these take too long, but I just have one more question.
Oh, sure.
I'm really fascinated by your talking about how this analysis is connected to our narrative and linking it to concepts of sustainability, because our commitment, whether it's as individuals or university, to something like environmental sustainability is based upon some narratives around human beings' relationship to the natural world, place in terms of geography and in terms of all kinds of other things. That I wonder if, as people learn more about their genetic background, if they might develop some different narratives about their connections to the place.
Well, and I, was thinking about like environmental racism and those kinds of things. I think this is an opportunity to create a kind of a dialogue. It's not, people take the same research and try to act like, oh, you could be in this club if you're 100% European, but then they get very upset because they can't find, they're not getting enough members. But I do think it's an opportunity to have that kind of a conversation. I don't think it's automatic. And my thing about doing this work is that it's a chance to bring people together where they feel positively in talking about race, in talking about diversity, and they're not fighting. And so I see that as a way, I could easily see that as linked to, like you said, to place and to where we belong, and that we're all that, and just looking at the out of Africa, that we're all in, we really are one. It's like, there's no way around that. We're all just people and mixing and matching more every day. So yeah, I was appreciative that you let me come and speak in this forum.
Good, well, thank you so much.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Yeah, good.
And to the semester.
Yeah, the stretch one was it? Yeah, thank you, and thank you for having me. And tell Jen Bacon. I said hello, and
Oh, well.
I'm moving to the neighborhood. We're working on this house. It's so slow,
Oh,
but
okay.